Hymns House, episode 15. My name is Jonathan Stern. I'm here with Lewis Stevens and Dr. H. Happy Thanksgiving to all of our Hymns homies. It's been a couple weeks. We are back to talk about Meta and GLP-1s and diabetes. As always, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you're interested in what we're talking about, join the Discord. That's where the best conversation happens after the show. To kick things off, I want to talk about Meta. Meta came out with some news that they're going to restrict the data that companies like Hims has access to. So specifically, healthcare companies are no longer going to have data about the specific conditions that customers may be dealing with. That's my sense of the news. There was some speculation about when it was going to be announced. There's an article that came out on December 9th suggesting that it will be rolled out on January 1st. It's somewhat unclear the degree to which Hims relies on Meta. There are clearly ads all over Facebook and Instagram, but there are also ads on TV. There are ads on YouTube. There are ads on TikTok. There are ads everywhere. And so it's not clear how much Hims relies on Meta right now. It's clearly not good news. It's clearly not great news for Hims. But Lewis, Dr. H, how should we be thinking about this shift, the crackdown on data that Hims will have access to as it targets potential new customers?
I think a good way to look at this, I'm going to take the other side of your perspective, Johnny, in the sense that I actually think it's a good thing. And I think it's a bit poetic that Meta, the loss of signal as a result of Meta's actions would be a bear thesis for Hims. It's poetic and it's ironic because in 2022, the bear thesis for Meta was that it was going to lose signal associated with as a result of Apple instituting new privacy policies. But the ultimate net result of the Apple privacy policy change, which ultimately led to loss of signal for advertisers on Meta's platform, was the further development of Meta's moat. It is now much harder for a new social media platform to spend tens of billions of dollars on AI data infrastructure. It's more difficult for these startups, and ultimately that would result in enhancing their ability to target or enhance the social media's platform, enhance the platform's ability to target users, new customers. So I've just seen this as nothing but bullish, frankly, because Hims does have the resources to overcome the issues associated with the loss of signal. And when I say loss of signal, I mean the data and information available to Hims to ultimately better and more effectively target advertisers. And the last thing I'll say before transitioning or turning it over to Dr. H is that Hims, this ultimately reveals one important competitive advantage for Hims. And we've talked about it in the past, right? Hims is a vertically integrated AI physician at national scale. And one point of vertical integration and the whole list of things that we've discussed in the past is the ability to execute performance marketing. It's the ability to market and leverage social media, leverage their ability to generate ROAS, return on ad spend. That is a key component of this vertically integrated platform where there's many, many different points of execution that cumulatively result in differentiation for the platform. So for ad spend to get more difficult, for the ROI to potentially be jeopardized, for most of the industry, I would say it's very bearish. And we've discussed competitors in the past. But for Hims, I think that it's just like, coming back to my introduction, I'll conclude here. It's like, we just went through this with Meta. Like there was this big bear thesis that the loss of signal, the loss of data available to Meta as a result of Apple's privacy policies that went into effect in 2022. We already went through this bear thesis of that being something that was very negative, but now it is a key competitive advantage for Meta. And Meta is sort of in a similar boat where it has so many different businesses in this one vertically integrated business that is its social media platforms. So for Hims, I think it's going to be the same thing. And this is just generally, I know I said I would conclude, but this is just generally an important thing for investors to consider because we've seen it countless times over the last 5 years, right? Very ironic outcomes where there's something that's very bullish, like for instance with Zoom. The pandemic was hugely bullish for Zoom, but it ended up being very bearish. Apple's privacy policy changes were hugely bearish for Meta, and then they ended up being very bullish. And then in Southeast Asia, there's another C Limited example where there's a lot of bearishness related to this or that, but it ended up being bullish. So with anything in investing, I think that objectively I'm right about HIMS and the fact that this is going to lead to a key competitive advantage for the platform. It's actually only going to widen the gulf between HIMS and its competitors. But for HIMS, I think inverting here, looking at the other side and seeing this as something that HIMS can overcome, and then it will act as a competitive advantage, I think that's the right way to look at this.
Lewis, could I ask real quickly, in the case of Meta, it was the news that Apple was going to crack down. That was interpreted initially as extremely bearish, but they've turned it into a competitive advantage. That's the idea here, right? Can you walk us through how the crackdown transitioned from bearish to bullish? What happened that made this a good thing after all?
Yeah, I mean, it's been clear that there was an inflection point in 2023 where the market was like, okay, Meta did lose revenue dollars as a result of the change, but now it's clear that they're leveraging artificial intelligence specifically as a result of all the CapEx spend that they did in 2020 to create better outcomes for advertisers in such a way that competitors would struggle. So I think the inflection point happened in 2023, and it was clear once certain KPIs continued to improve, like Facebook's monthly active users continued to grow, the entire set of properties continued to grow, and specifically the Meta CPM, so the demonstration of the effectiveness, the desire for its ads, that continued to increase, and once these key metrics continue to increase, the market has just run away with Meta stock. And I think over time, what we will see, if my thinking is correct, and I do very much believe it's correct, over time, what we'll see is these metrics will continue to improve for HIMS, such as the key metrics we've talked about in the past, like customer acquisition cost to net new sub, that ratio, that will either stabilize or continue to improve. Subscribers will continue to grow. Growth will remain healthy. I mean, it can't really accelerate much beyond where it is today, and margins will expand, and we'll see better operating leverage from HIMS. And all of those factors really were the factors that, the business models aren't one-to-one, but those were the factors that contributed to Meta really taking off. Accelerating growth, stable growth, expanding margins, healthy customer growth, for Meta's healthy user growth. And so I think, we will likely see that for HIMS, and over time it will be seen that whatever regulatory changes or whatever policy changes Meta is making will actually act as a key competitive moat or competitive advantage for the HIMS platform.
So that was great, Lewis. Thanks. Final thing I'm curious about is the timeline over which this might happen. Would you expect customer acquisition costs to rise in the short term, but to fall pretty rapidly or significantly over the longer run as this shift goes from bearish to bullish? And how long should an investor expect that to take?
Well, I don't think that. I really think that Meta's policy changes will have a negligible impact. If they do have an impact, we will certainly hear about it on the Q1 or the Q4 2024 earnings call in January or early February. So everyone tune in for the analysis and interpretation of a potential revelation.
That'll be our second earnings. Right. We'll be live with the live stream again, right, Lewis?
Oh, for sure. We're doing the live stream. I'm excited for it.
Hopefully we'll get Dr. H this time as well. We'll see.
We'll see what happens. But I think, there will be a key moment in January. So everybody should tune in, pay attention. Because for Meta, there was a loss of revenue for a period of time. And in addition to very difficult comps, that led to slowing growth. And by difficult comps, I mean in 2021, Meta had explosive revenue growth because there was tons of ad dollars, free money being poured onto the platform. And by late 2022, there was no longer all of that free money. Rates had risen a lot. And additionally, they lost $10 billion of sales in a couple quarters, and maybe for net over the year. And so not only did they lose money related to a slowing economy, higher rates, they also lost money in terms of growth, nominal marginal dollars added on top of their revenue. They lost, the advertising or the money related to the Apple privacy policy. So that resulted in cataclysmically slowing growth. So, I mean, that's on the table for HIMSS. I don't think that will happen like that because they're so early on their growth curve, whereas Meta was vastly more mature during that unique dynamic in 2022 that I've been describing. So I think the impact, if there is one, will be negligible. It is. I think HIMSS should take the opportunity to talk about it, though, because ultimately it's an AI problem. And the HIMSS House community has been founded on like one phrase. HIMSS is an AI orchestrated general physician at national scale. And like, that's the thesis. If that works, if that's truly an accurate characterization of HIMSS, then this is, a $50 billion business. So I think we're too early on the growth curve for this to really have a material impact. But I do think HIMSS should take the time to say, look, like this may impact us a little bit, but we can overcome it. We have the technology. We have the least tech debt. We're the best platform. We have the best ability to execute. So this is going to be a huge benefit. We have the most resources. So this is going to be a huge benefit to us long term. And it should be seen as a key competitive advantage. We can operate on these platforms profitably, whereas others will struggle because they don't have the resources to scale to create the clean technology necessary to execute in this new environment. And that's everything that I described is exactly what Meta saw. And C Limited. C has gone through a similar situation where very bearish arguments were levied against the company. But ironically, they became the central elements of the bullish thesis. And that's something that happens so much in the stock market. The ironic outcomes are pervasive, and so that's my 2 cents on the Meta stuff. I think it's really positive. I was actually excited when I saw it. I was like, oh, we're going to do this again. Okay, this is going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be good.
Dr. H, any comments on top of what Lewis has already shared?
Yeah, I like what Lewis said about HIMSS being a company that can really adapt well to it. I think they are probably best positioned out of all the telemedicine companies to, take a bit of news like this and roll with it and change and modify their tactics. Restricting their access to certain information, I view it as kind of like a little bit of a detour they have to take to get to the same endpoint. I think it looks like Meta's going to restrict what the HIMSS can view, with in terms of the consumer's online activity. They mentioned in the article, companies won't be able to see what's in their shopping cart or what purchases they made or what things they've searched online through the Meta platform. Or I was even just thinking like, well, what if there's like a guy who's going on men's hair loss support groups or Facebook groups and just looking at before and after pictures. So, those kinds of things, that information's not going to be readily accessible to him to use to target their marketing. But from a medical standpoint, even if you take all that stuff away, you can still do some targeting with, men's hair loss. You're probably going to target demographics of a male, mid-20s to late 40s. So you still can do some targeting, even if they're making it slightly harder for you to do the very specific pinpoint targeting that they could do before. But as Lewis said, I think, HIMSS has shown that they can execute a game plan and a vision with a business plan. So even if it takes them 3 steps to get to the end point of acquiring a customer when it would have taken 1.5 steps before, I think they're in a well position to do it better than, say, a Ro or some of the other smaller companies like Henry or whoever it is.
On the subject of Ro, I don't mean to take us off of our scheduled content, but I think the Ro thing was the other thing that I wanted to touch on. We were talking about it before the podcast. Well, what were the things? The Ro thing, I think, is another example. If I understand correctly, Ro has partnered with Lilly.
Got it. So yeah, let's get into the Ro-Lilly news, I guess. The announced yesterday morning pre-market that Ro is partnering with Lilly. My understanding is that there will be discounted Zepbound, I think it said low dose vials available through Ro, but it's the brand name Zepbound that Lilly sells. Is that your understanding as well, Dr. H and Lewis?
Yes, that's correct. It would be for the brand name low dose starter prescription.
And the price, I don't know the price exactly. I think it's like $400 to $600, somewhere in there. So Hims will still be cheaper, but it is the first instance of a telehealth provider like Ro or like Hims teaming up with the big
dogs.
The big dogs. Thank you, Dr. H, Lilly or Novo. Yeah, Lewis, let's get into that. And there is some American diabetes stuff that I want to talk about later, but this is certainly more topical. So take it away, Lewis.
So I don't want to get too much on the soapbox, with
Lewis, this is the podcast.
Well,
this is a podcast, and you're one of the stars up on the box, Lewis.
So this news was part and parcel of the entire train of thought that I shared to introduce this podcast. And by that, I mean that him sold off like 10% or maybe from its highs even more on news that Big Pharma was willing to work with the Pepsi of the telehealth industry and that there were inroads being made between the two companies. And I mean, Hims is to Coke as Ro is to Pepsi, and that's just what the data says. But
and I just want to throw in Hims initially sold off 10%. By the end of the day, it had rebounded. It was only down, I think, 2% at close yesterday, and so they sort of shook off the news. But you're right; it was a massive sell-off at 8 a.m.
Yeah, so I think again, it's just part and parcel of my introductory thoughts. Like I think it's clearly bullish long term. And it just relates to everything we've talked about on this podcast, which is, the idea is that Hims is it's ultimately just a general physician, and general physicians partner with pharmaceutical companies and act effectively as trained salespeople on these drugs to some extent. It could be characterized in that way. And so there's no reason why Hims and Ro won't be good general physician partners to the large pharmaceutical companies. And today it's Lilly and Novo. In 10 years, it's going to be another company, right? But by year 10, everybody will have accepted this thesis, granted it works out, that Hims is ultimately an AI orchestrated general physician competitor, with this vertically integrated platform. And so I think it's I think reading the news, the meta news, this Lilly news, and this is, I've analyzed hundreds, maybe 1,000 plus companies. I don't know how many companies I've analyzed, but lots. And so I've seen these exact dynamics play out where there's these ironically very bullish things that are painted as bearish early on. And I'm really, I'm a Hims shareholder. I'm, part of Hims house, everything. But I would say if these were negative things, these are, in my eyes, clearly positive. And the stocks are selling off. And if you've been around the market for the last 5 years, you've seen this happen over and over and over again, where bad things get bought and good things get sold. And not just on a sell the news kind of dynamic. It's been like the market said, this is really negative, and maintain that idea for potentially years, at the end of which the market's perspective reverses, and then all of a sudden they say, oh wait, this is actually kind of positive. And we've seen it with Meta, we've seen it with C Limited, we've seen it with Amazon, all the huge sell-offs, Palantir, all the huge sell-offs. There was a lot of really good things happening through that period in response to which the stocks were selling off. And so with Hims, it's like, I just objectively see these things as positive in response to which the stock's selling off. But I can see the first order thinking, which, is often the prevailing thinking in the market, which is, this bad thing on a superficial level, a competitor's getting a partnership deal or they're losing signal. I understand first order thinking that it is negative. But if we just invert the topic, we look at the other side, we look at various points of logic, I think it's very clear that these are ultimately bullish for HIMSS long term.
Did you have a perspective on the Ro-Lilly news, Dr. H?
I think it's bullish in the standpoint that all of a sudden you get these big giants, the big dogs, Lilly. They're acknowledging the existence of these direct-to-consumer telemedicine health platforms. Before they were like, oh, who's Ro, who's HIMSS, whatever. Where several $100 billion worth, in our company. Like, why do we have to worry about this $5 billion company? But with this direct, actual working relationship, they're acknowledging, hey, actually, telehealth is a very viable ways to reach out to consumers, patients. It's a very viable way to make money and get our products out into the world. And it's an acknowledgement that, we actually have to do something to make sure the medicines that we want to sell are reaching the people that we want to. So in a way, I think it's great that, hey, even if it's working with Ro, it's like saying, yeah, we have to pay attention to these guys. We want to work with them, because it's just a new way of business, basically, that people are expecting a better way to reach out to their physicians. That's my initial take of it. Whether, I think HIMSS ultimately in the long run will execute a little bit better than Ro will, obviously, because I'm a pretty big HIMSS bull. But in the grand scheme of things, I think that it's a positive sign that big pharma here is actually, wanting to work with the littler telemed companies.
Regarding the upcoming FDA decision about the tirzepatide shortage, does Ro's decision to partner with Lilly, or Lilly's interest in partnering with Ro, give either of you a sense for where things may shake out in a week? Or are you not reading into that side of it too much?
Well, I do have a perspective there. I don't know that I'm reading into it too much there, but I wanted to say that I thought Dr. H's point was great and thought-provoking, and I just wanted to reiterate it from my end, maybe to just help myself remember it. But I do think it is significant that these major drug companies are now looking at HIMSS and Ro as a channel for distribution. That essentially, they've looked at primary care physicians selling, Zoloft or whatever, or whatever drug's been, accepted by the consensus of the medical community, which is an important part of this thesis. You can tune into past podcasts for a greater elaboration. But now seeing Ro and HIMSS as important distribution channels, I guess, to put it in slightly different terms from the way that Dr. H described it, but I think that's such an important idea. And, we'll see how dominant HIMSS and Ro can be. It does appear that the difficulty of executing the vertically integrated platform at huge scale and doing it consistently is a material competitive advantage. But over time, who knows how important these distribution channels, HIMSS and Ro, essentially, could become to the major pharmaceutical companies.
But I mean, just to push back or to ask about this, Lilly already has Lilly Direct. Is the conclusion that we should draw that Ro and HIMSS are just much, much better at distribution, and that Lilly Direct isn't really that good, that they're not getting it to work to the degree that HIMSS and Ro have, and so they need the smaller, sexier, tech-forward companies to help with distribution?
I think patients are just wary of going onto a pharmaceutical company's website directly, Lilly Direct, and ordering it from there, even if they're partnering with a Ro or, for example, future example, HIMSS or something like that. I think psychologically it just feels better to the patient to be getting the medicine, the brand name medicine, through another provider that's not directly off of the pharmaceutical's website. I think it just psychologically it just feels different. And
then Lewis, you said you did have a perspective on December 19th regarding the tirzepatide shortage. How does this bear upon that? You've been hesitant to wade into that territory in the past, but
I just wanted to acknowledge your point there, which I think maybe there is something interesting going on there. There's 7 days until the announcement, the latest on the shortage policy from the FDA. I don't know. I don't think we should read too much into Ro's announcement or Lilly's announcement as it relates to that. I mean, there's probably some relation to it. There's a lot of money at stake, and it's been a battle, and in terms of who gets to sell what and on what schedule and all these different variables in this equation of who gets to sell. Can there be sold compounded drugs on these platforms, specifically drugs under patent? My perspective is the perspective that I maintain all the time, which is weight loss is going to be a category within which there are 5 to 10 different products. And over time, there's going to be branded drugs. There's going to be branded GLP-1s. There's going to be compounded GLP-1s. There's going to be oral weight loss drugs. There's going to be new weight loss drugs. There's all this fixation on the current drugs. There's going to be new ones in the future. So I think the weight loss category should be looked at as a diversified portfolio of products. And I don't think that GLP-1s are absolutely essential to making weight loss successful over time. Of course, Hims being able to sell, GLP-1s unfettered, without any restrictions, that would be ideal. But to get Hims to $100 a share, I don't think they need. We just don't need to sell GLP-1s in an unfettered fashion today. Like, it's going to happen. Like, it
depends when you want to get to $100 a share, though.
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand there's nuance, and there people could push back and say, no, GLP-1s are important. And I agree. I also have a very long-term perspective. So,
yeah. Shifting to our final topic, the American Diabetes Association released a paper, I think it was on December 3rd, advising against compounded GLP-1s, basically saying that compounded GLP-1s are not safe for patients. Thank you for sharing. Could you blow that up just a bit, Dr. H? There we go. Compounded GLP-1 and dual GIP-GLP-1 receptor agonists, a statement from the American Diabetes Association. Headline here, again, that these are not safe or less safe for customers than the name brand Ozempic, Wegovy, Zepbound, on and on. Now, I think it's worth noting that the American Diabetes Association is funded. Two of their major donors, not their only donors, but two of their major donors are Lilly and Novo Nordisk. Dr. H, you read the paper. What are your thoughts on this statement and this news?
Yeah, the first thing I want to point out here, actually right here, I'm going to highlight here. An ADA statement is an official ADA point of view or position that does not contain clinical practice recommendations and may be issued on advocacy, policy, economic, or medical issues related to diabetes. So even if they made a recommendation here, it's not a formal clinical practice recommendation for doctors. It's their point of view. I think there's some very good points brought up in this paper, and I'll go through some of them. And it pertains to companies like Hims and Ro and doing compounded medicines. But my general sense is, if I were the ones doing a recommendation like this, I probably in the end would say compounded medicines, GLP-1s are available. Talk to your doctor about it. Have a discussion with them. Do the whole informed consent, shared decision-making process, and decide between you and your doctor if the compounded medicine is right for you or if you want to go with the brand name medicine. So that would have been my personal, key point summary, rather than saying like we recommend against using it. But I'll just go through some of the points that they made through here. One of the main points they want to talk about was safety, quality, effectiveness. The medicines are not identical to the FDA products. There could be variance in the effectiveness and safety profiles of the medicines depending on where you're getting the compounded medicines from. A major source of the concern would be dosing errors and adverse events. And I've actually seen some of this happen with people using compounded medicines. It can be kind of confusing when you receive the medicine. The medicine comes in vials most commonly, and the customer has to drop the medicine themselves. Kind of like if you imagine, on TV, like a nurse or doctor sticking a needle into a vial and drying up the medicine, and then they kind of flick the syringe and get the air bubble out. So that's what the person's doing themselves. And it's not super hard. Once you get the hang of it, it's rather easy. I mean, people who are on testosterone shots at home, they do a similar thing. So, it's something that you can do by yourself, but it just takes a little practice. And if you've never done it before, it can be a little confusing. The other thing that's confusing is that each compounding pharmacy, they may make the medicine in different strength concentrations. So on labels, you might see some glutide. It might be made in a concentration that's 1 milligram per ml, or it might be 2.5 milligrams per ml, or 5 milligrams per ml. So it gets really confusing because the patient isn't aware that there's a difference between the concentration and their actual dosage. And very commonly, the instructions will say something like, inject 20 units. Well, now you're introducing another thing that's very like a foreign concept to people. What's 20 units? It's 0.2 milliliters. And how many milligrams is that 20 units equal to? So it's a lot of math and figuring out formulas and figuring out medicine dosages, and it just goes over a lot of people's heads. So it's not very clear what the patient is actually taking. So I can see this concern here. The good telemed companies are aware of this, and they have videos on how to do the medicine. They have very clear infographics or tables of clear instructions on what you should be taking. I think Hims has a diagram where they show a picture of the actual syringe with the line markings on it and the medicine drawn up to the line that they should be taking. So it will be like your first 1 through 4 weeks, you bring the medicine up to this 20 line, and that's 20 units. 20 units equals 0.25 milligrams and whatnot. So as much of an issue it is of how it can be confusing to people, the good telemed companies are aware of this, and they will have resources upon resources to make sure that the patient's taking the right medicine here. I found on Reddit. So can you see this table here?
Blow that up just a bit if you would.
Oops.
Command plus.
I'm just going to randomly interject this now.
You see that? Yeah.
There we go.
Dr. H, to your point, my friend recently told me that he bought, I think, 8 weeks of Zepbound. I don't know if it was from Hims or what platform, but he said that he's just not taking it because he doesn't like the needle. So he has this 8-week supply of GLP-1s, but he just won't take it literally because of the method of delivery or administration of the drug.
Yeah, that's a situation where oral medicines would be a better fit for someone who just has a very strong kind of like a needle phobia almost,
Yeah. But I'm just sort of derailing us here because when he told me that, I didn't really know what to, my initial reaction was, then the oral business is going to continue to boom. But it is fascinating that these GLP-1s are a wonder drug that requires this like aggressive delivery that a lot of people don't feel comfortable with. Anyway, random aside.
This table here is something I found on Reddit, and it's the part of the material that Hims gives out to patients. They have a dosing table here. So even though it says inject 8 units, they make it very clear what your dosage is. So as confusing as dosing can be, the good companies will do as much as they can to make sure it's as clear as possible on dosage, using the medicines appropriately. The rest of the ADA article, let's see.
Dr. H, just below the piece that you've highlighted there, they say even more concerning to safety are counterfeit products. Can you say a little bit about that and how common that is from what you've seen? I mean, obviously that does not include what Hims and Ro are selling.
Correct. The pharmacies that Hims and Ro is using are vetted compound pharmacies. I think the ones that they're mostly concerned about would be, they mentioned down here actually, what are some warning signs, key warning signs? Like if you try to purchase tirzepatide and there wasn't a doctor to create an actual prescription, or they don't give you the name of the pharmacy and whether the information, if it's licensed by the state board, if you're getting medicines and it just looks weird, different things like that where the sources of the medicine are just clearly very sketchy. Even I've seen people who are hopping onto Ro or Hims or whatever, coming from their local med spa, and they get their medicine pre-filled in a syringe in a baggie with a handwritten label on the front, and it just says 0.2. And it's just very clearly not standard medical practice when you're dispensing medicines. You're supposed to have very clear directions and what the medicine is, and the patients are getting the medicine in a baggie. You know what I mean? Like it's some, cocaine or something like that. So I think a lot of these other concerns are geared towards, less regulated pharmacies where the source of it actually is in question. But these are not the pharmacies that Ro or Hims will be using. So the medicines that Hims uses, everything's very clearly labeled. They have the source of the medicine from the pharmacy. They have the certificates of analysis and things like that all available. So this whole section here is just not really applicable to Hims for the recommendation. This whole table here talks about what I just mentioned, like of how confusing the medicine is and the likelihood and chances of a person giving themselves too much medicine causing side effects is pretty high if they don't understand exactly, how much they should be taking. Exactly what I mentioned here, confusion regarding the variable units of measurement, milliliters, milligrams, units. It can be very confusing. So I think the basis of this article is basically saying there's some sketchy places you can get medicine from that's not the real medicine. If you do get the real compounded medicines from a legit compounding pharmacy, it can be kind of confusing. You might do the wrong dose. And that's how they came up with this recommendation of saying don't use compounded medicines. In my opinion, I think the discussion should be talking to your doctor and saying, hey, I can't afford the brand name medicine. It's way too expensive, $1,000 a month. I can't afford the compounded version, $190 a month. Is this the right fit for me? And the doctor can go review their medical history and whatever, and also have the discussion saying, hey, actually, in its current state, the compound medicines are a little finicky with how you take it. It's not a pen. You have to be comfortable giving yourself a shot. You have to be comfortable doing the right dosing and drawing up the medicine yourself to the correct amount. Is this something that you think you can capably do by yourself, with the potential that if you do it wrong, you could potentially end up feeling super sick and vomiting all day and all night and get dehydrated and go to the hospital. So I feel like it should have been a discussion where it says, talk to your doctor about the ins and outs, the pros, the cons of using compounded medicines, see if it's right for you, see if it's safe for you to do, see if you're capable of doing it, and then make that decision between the two of you.
I think all of this also relates to Amazon and just generally relates to understanding the competitive differentiation of Hims. Maybe it's a stretch, but it's worth noting that there are people out there getting GLP-1s from medical spas in baggies. Like there's this black market, and people are like, no, all 200 million, all 300 million to account for the fact that there's some children out there. A portion of the population is going to be 18 years and older. But all 300 million Americans are all going to use Amazon Prime instantly tomorrow. There's no informational asymmetry. They know exactly down to the dime, down to the molecule, what drug to take, at what price tomorrow. And it's just like, that's not how the medical industry works. And we've been talking about it for a long time. And this is, clear illustration, the idea that people are gambling on their health with black market GLP-1s. It's like, yeah, that's ridiculous. People shouldn't be doing that. There's got to be a better way. But also that illustrates just how much informational asymmetry is out there. Analysts think that the average person is going to understand the molecular composition of GLP-1s and how they interact with their body. They're going to understand the fair price for this molecular interaction. It's like get out of the ivory tower of your Wall Street floor. Like, this is not how humans operate. The vast majority. A lot of them are going to the med spa to get the underground drugs, which is fine.
The med spas are just, it's a wild west out there. And I've got crazy stories of patients who started at the med spas and coming to Hims or Ro or whoever, wanting a better solution because they were just not having a great experience out there. For example, one person was saying, I get it from the med spa through my chiropractor. And I'm thinking, well, chiropractors can't prescribe this medicine legally. What are you actually taking? What is this that you're injecting into yourself? I'm scared to even ask you because you literally have no idea what this chiropractor is giving you. Supposedly it's a GLP-1, but technically, legally, they can't prescribe it. Other things are like, a person comes from med spa and they want to switch over to an equivalent high dosage that they've already been on. And a lot of the platforms will ask, can you just scan your current prescription? We want to make sure you're safely doing this transition. We want to make sure we match you to the same milligram dosage. And the patient will say, my med spa doesn't give me that information. They just give me this in the baggie. And then we'll say, legally, you have the right to access your medical records. If you ask them for it, they have to legally give you your medical records, which will show the milligram dosage. They'll come back to me 2 days later and say, the med spa is not comfortable with this. They don't want to give this information to me. I don't know what to do. And I'm just like, these med spas are operating this in such a shady way that they can't even do what is legally required of them to do, is to give the patient their own medical information, their own medical records. So what exactly are you giving these people? It just really freaks me out of how this is so out there in the world. It's the wild, wild west. And I'm actually kind of thankful that there is this attention and scrutiny to companies like Ro and Hims and compound pharmacies, because I've actually feel kind of scared for people who are getting their medicines through these other channels that are just so, sketchy.
Totally agree. And I just, I'm going to sound like a broken record here with these ideas, but it really comes back to competitive differentiation and understanding the nuance of that with respect to Hims versus, for instance, Lilly Direct or Amazon or Walmart or whomever. The majority of people, or I would say a large portion of human beings, have no idea what's going on, like as it relates to a lot of things. I myself have no idea what's going on as it relates to a lot of things. And people lead busy lives. They have children, they have spouses, they have extended family, they have coworkers, they have visions, they have dreams. A lot of people, and I understand the people listening to this are probably very analytical and very nuanced in their thinking, but a lot of people just go to the doctor and say, save me. And they just listen to what the doctor says. They're not, the ROI, the risk return on them becoming an expert on the molecular interactions of these GLP-1s, it's just not there for them. So they're going to go to a trusted source who's able to meet them where they're at. And they're going to listen to whatever that trusted source says until something doesn't go right or whatever. And then the other thing I would say as it relates to Dr. H's commentary is that, primary care physicians, it could be argued that they're not doing a very good job within the sphere of Hims treatment protocols, the multi-product platform that it operates, the products on that platform. So it's like people are coming to these doctors with no information. They have no idea what's going on. And that's how they end up at these med spas with underground GLP-1s. And they're saying, save me. And who can deliver better treatment? Hims as an AR orchestrated general physician at national scale, or a general physician? And the answer is not going to be the same in all cases. But for Hims, we can see arguably a vastly more consistent and high quality product emerging via its technology platform versus what you would get at a primary care physician, where people are coming again to say, I have no idea what's going on with my brain, save me. I have no idea what's going on with my sexual health, save me. I have no idea what's going on with my hair, save me. That's what people do when they go to the doctors. There are the hardcore analytical folks who are, trying to find 5 years of finasteride for $9. Like, that exists. But that's not the nature of the TAM that Hims is addressing.
I'll tell you a little secret about primary care physicians. I'm a primary care physician myself, board certified family medicine. Basically, your first touch point in the medical system if a person's trying to find medical care, basically. To become a primary care physician, you do 4 years of undergraduate college degree, you do 4 years of medical school, and then you do 3 years of residency training. Sometimes you might do an optional fellowship 1 or 2 years after that. So even after all these years of school, I could tell you on less than one hand how many times during residency I've actually managed ED or sexual health. I mean, we get a lot of training on bread and butter, very important chronic disease management, high blood pressure, diabetes, different things like that. But did we ever manage ED? No. We may have had an hour lecture of male pattern hair loss. Did I ever start anyone on finasteride during residency and training? I don't think so. So these are important conditions that patients experience in their lives, but it's just briefly touched upon in training. If a patient would have came and seen me the first 1, 2, 3, 4 years out of residency, I would have had to look up how do you treat male pattern hair loss? What does finasteride do specifically? What's the dosing of it? What are the side effects? So, it's a kind of a dirty little secret that the family medicine trainees, we learn a lot about a lot of different things. We can manage the heck out of a lot of conditions, but for very specific conditions, it's very briefly touched upon in school, medical school training. And when you're comparing someone like a primary care physician who has never really done these that often in their practice compared to someone on HIMSS or Ro or whoever who does 40 hours a week of just hair loss management, there's going to be a pretty big difference in comfort level and expertise and whatnot in the different treatment products. So not to talk smack about my own profession, but it's just the nature of it. We have so much to learn. There's so much to learn and get experience treating, and just some conditions just fall through the cracks, and we don't get that expertise until we actually start doing it on a day-to-day basis.
Well, on that note, I want to wrap for episode 15. Thank you, Lewis. Thank you, Dr. H. Again, it would be very helpful if you liked this video, subscribe to our channel, and if you enjoyed this conversation, you will certainly enjoy our Discord. The link is below and on our Twitter account. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.